This is From the Courtroom to the Boardroom, the podcast for the next generation of legal leaders with me, Simon Gibson. I was a lawyer for 13 years until I walked away from legal practice and entered the world of business. I'm now CEO of the Spirent Group and I lead a portfolio of businesses in the UK and Australia. On this upbeat podcast, I tackle the big issues facing law firms and businesses alike with the help of intriguing guests. Are you ready to rewrite the script? Then it's great to have you along for the ride. Hello friends, welcome to the podcast. Hope you're all well. We're talking law in the Metaverse today. I've got really interested in the Metaverse. Legal businesses, like all others, are learning more about a whole range of emerging technologies, from blockchain to artificial intelligence. And the reason I've become particularly interested in where the Metaverse fits in is that we've all become very familiar for years with accessing the internet via our phones and laptops. And in recent years, digital communication platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams have been worth their weight in gold. But I find them quite unsatisfactory from a human perspective. I like meeting people. I like having the experience of presence. I like spending time with colleagues, team members, friends, clients. And that to me is very relevant both to being a lawyer, being a leader of a law firm, but also just to life in generally. And the reason why I really like the potential that the Metaverse seems to show is that it does seem to offer more of a visceral, immersed experience. We've seen virtual reality and augmented reality as some examples of that. And I've become really keen to understand and learn more about how this next stage of technology could potentially become relevant to being a lawyer, being a leader of a law firm, or of course in business generally. We definitely need some help in terms of understanding what the current stage of the technology is and where we might go from here. And I'm delighted that we'll be welcoming Dr. Mark van Rijmenam to the podcast today. Mark is one of the most well-known voices in technology throughout the world. He's a future tech strategist and he's a best-selling author of a number of books. He's a globally recognized expert speaker on a whole range of areas of technology and has particular expertise in the metaverse. I first came across Mark's work when I read his fantastic book, Step Into the Metaverse, a couple of years ago. You will find links to Mark's website and to all of his books at the bottom of the podcast description. I cannot recommend his work enough for anyone who wants a common sense and plain language understanding of this really important area of emerging technology. So it was a great chat that I had with Mark, and I hope you enjoy it too. We kick off with talking a little bit about what the metaverse is. We then move on to how the metaverse might incorporate the legal sector, and of course how law firms might incorporate the metaverse into their technology strategy. We move on to talk about some of the risks and solutions. We spent some real quality time on how important identity verification will be to the metaverse, particularly in the context of legal practice. And we finish off with tips for law firms interested in incorporating the metaverse into their business strategy. So I really enjoyed Mark's company. I had a great chat. I hope you gain value from it as well. So please do sit back, relax, and listen to this episode of From the Courtroom to the Boardroom, Law in the Metaverse, with me and my guest, Dr. Mark van Rijmenam. Here we go. Mark, welcome. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm very good, sir. Simon, thanks for having me. Great to be on the show.
The pleasure is all ours. Now, Mark, you're known as the digital speaker. As I said in the intro, you're one of the best known experts in technology. Just tell us a little about your journey to date, Mark.
Well, I've been in this space for over a decade. I started in this space focused on big data. And from big data, I sort of rolled into blockchain when I was doing my PhD at the University of Technology here in Sydney. Came across AI, incorporated that, and rolled into all these amazing technologies. And since the space is developing at a breakneck pace at the moment, it's sometimes difficult to keep up, but it's an amazing journey. I love what I do. I get to help organizations, Fortune 500 companies from all around the world, to help them understand emerging technologies and how they are impacting their business. I have, as you mentioned, I've just started the research institute, which is really focused on elevating the world's digital awareness to ensure a thriving digital future. Because with my deep expertise on emerging technologies, I'm kind of worried about where we're heading, and I think there's some work to be done in that space. Above all, I try to practice what I preach. So I'm trying to build a digital twin. I'm available as avatars, as holograms. I wrote my 5th book with ChatGPT. I think I was the first one in the world. By now, I did it in 5 days. By now, I think there are dozens of books by ChatGPT on Amazon. I delivered the first TEDx talk in virtual reality. I really like to practice what I preach to understand these technologies, so I can help organizations understand these technologies as well.
Well, you clearly live and breathe it, Mark. And the other thing I really like about your work is that you're not someone who advocates the positives of the emerging technologies without also considering the risks. You do highlight in all of your work that I've read and experienced that we do have some concerns that we need to bottom out before we can all fully embrace the metaverse and other emerging technologies, and we'll definitely get onto those.
Well, what I want to say is, I think all these technologies are super cool tools, and it's amazing what we have achieved already so far today. But I think it's important to have this balanced view, to have to see both sides of the coin, because if we don't, I think we sort of have a challenge as a society.
Yes, indeed. So let's start with the absolute basics, if we may, Mark. So what is the metaverse?
The metaverse, it's a very abstract concept. And for my book, Step Into the Metaverse, I interviewed about 100. I did 100 in-depth interviews and another 150 surveys, and I got 250 different definitions of what the metaverse is, which sort of shows you that everyone has that different perspective on what the metaverse is. Now, for me, if I look at the metaverse, first let's get some myths out of the way. The metaverse is not Web3. The metaverse is not gaming. The metaverse is not virtual reality. It can be all of these, together, but it doesn't have to be. For me, the metaverse is very much, where the physical and the digital worlds converge into a so-called phygital experience. So we bring the digital world into the physical and the physical world into the digital. There's a lot of information in that small sentence, but basically what it means is that, if we bring the physical world into the digital world, that's basically what we're doing as we speak. You are in the UK, I'm in Australia, and we are meeting digitally through this podcast platform. You could argue that is sort of part of a very, very early phase of our stage of the metaverse. Another aspect what I think is really important of the metaverse is digital twins. Digital replicas of physical assets or systems or a system of systems that we can interact with through a digital means. So that can be a computer, it can be a tablet, it can be a smartwatch for that matter, or it can be virtual reality. To me, that's also part of the metaverse, and actually a very important part, and I call it tier 1 of the metaverse, with tier 0 being the physical world. Now, where we move the digital world into the physical world, that's of course most known as augmented reality, where we can add digital layers on top of our physical reality to interact with in novel ways with this physical world. This can be for entertainment, where we have a flying dragon, a purple dragon above Sydney Opera House that you can view with your augmented reality glasses or with your smartphone. Or it can be for in your factory for the enterprise metaverse, where you can have an overlay of a machine that you need to fix, and your mechanic is not there, so you have to fix it yourself, and the overlay will tell you what to do. So this is a very simple explanation of what the metaverse is, but it's very much where the physical and digital worlds converge, and you can actually argue that it is the next iteration of the internet. And when we first had the first web, at the start of the century, very basic, very very one-way direction, not much was possible. Then we got the mobile web, we got the social web, and now we're getting the immersive web. And the immersive web is a 3D internet, and we move from 2D internet to a 3D internet, and the internet will will become as pervasive as the air we breathe. And we'll move from having to make an active decision to go on the internet by getting our phone out or our smartwatch or whatever device we have to being in the internet. So we're going to become part of the internet, and that will completely change the narrative. That's my explanation of the metaverse: the convergence, physical, digital, a 3D immersive internet, and we are becoming part of that internet.
That's so useful. When I was thinking about this, I mean, I found this principle that this is basically the next stage of the internet. I found that the best way for me to understand it. Let me just bring this out to a real life situation and see if I've got this right. Obviously, when we're buying a new car, what we've all become familiar with is not having to drive down to the car dealership, the showroom. We tend to log on to a website and we'll look at what our car might look like just in a picture. As websites have become more advanced, it's become possible for us to look inside the car via the website. And then when it's got to the next stage, when we've had virtual communication, it's possible now for us, whilst we're doing this, to talk to someone at the car dealership who might get in the car and keep talking to us whilst we view the vehicle. My understanding, just pushing what you've said, Mark, to this real life situation, is that when we reach the metaverse technology, it might actually be possible for us to experience an element of presence in the car dealership and perhaps even in the car through use of these 3D augmented technologies. Have I got that right?
Yes, I think that's correct. I think we'll move to internet in the next 5 to 10 years, where the lines between the physical world and the digital world are going to blur. And that the example that you give from the car dealer, I think, is an excellent example. You will be able to step into that car in a virtual reality environment and literally experience the car as it is in real life. And indeed, the car sales agent can sit next to you in the car. You can see the agent as if you are sitting next to him or her. And you can have a conversation. You might even be able to drive sort of the car to get a bit of a feeling of how it sounds, and along the road, maybe other things that we can start to understand how they work and feel. And I think that is really what the internet, the immersive internet, is going to promise us, blurring the lines between the physical and the digital reality. Of course, today is still very, very early days. And I read the news I think a couple of days ago that Meta has buried their metaverse, which I think is just such a hype-driven news, because it's just nonsense. I think it's not the fact that we now have what people call generative AI, and therefore the metaverse does not happen anymore. I think that's just all bullocks, and the metaverse will happen. It just takes time to develop this stuff, and I think for whatever I think about Mark Zuckerberg, and I don't like him, as you read my book, so you know my opinion of him. But I do think he has a good vision there, and I do think that that it is going to happen, not today, not in 2 to 3 years, but towards the end of this decade. Definitely the metaverse, the immersive internet, is going to become an ordinary part of our daily lives.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting you put that perspective on it. I mean, just to talk about, when we talk about Meta, we're talking about what used to be Facebook, which Mark Zuckerberg is the leader of. I agree with you that from a vision perspective, what they've set out is very exciting. I really enjoyed both of the Meta keynote addresses on YouTube over the last couple of years. Let's just talk about where the technology is now and perhaps who the main players are in the metaverse, because my impression is exactly the same as yours. We know now that we can strap on an Oculus, a Quest. My daughter's got a Quest, which she does gaming on, which she does virtual boxing on, and I think it's pretty good. But it doesn't appear to me to be anywhere really close to what you would consider that visceral, immersed experience involving presence. In terms of the other thing, just to finish off on that, is these Oculuses are quite big, clunky things at the moment. I'm not sure I'd wander around with these on, or meet a client or something with them on. When do the direction of travel seems to me to be that in a defined period of time, we can experience this immersive internet through maybe a pair of glasses like what I'm wearing today, and that would be a lot more convenient, a lot more user friendly. Where are we now in terms of the technology? If someone was to say today, right, I'm setting up a business in the metaverse and I'm going to close my physical office and I'm going to operate entirely in the metaverse, is that a realistic vision?
It is a realistic vision. I don't think I would do it, but I think it is possible. I think that to really go down that route, I think that the hardware as well as the software is not there yet. We'll get there. I'm confident. We'll the Oculus Quest or the Meta Quest, I have to say. What you say is correct. They're bulky, they're heavy, and you have other ones. I think the HTC 5 XR, I think, is without battery. I think 200 grams or so. So that's or 250 grams. So that is moving in the right direction. But it's still a clunky device that you're not going to wear if you want to go out on the street, because you will walk into a pole or some other people, so you're not going to wear that. And then wearing a device like that on your head all the time is tiring for your eyes, for your brain, for your body, because it's heavy and it's not, the latency and everything and the visuals are good, but not seamless enough not to get nauseous or not to get eye strain or whatsoever. So I think we'll definitely get there. This is just, I think we are somewhere in the BlackBerry era, and Apple has not yet released their iPhone. And just like the first iPhone, you couldn't do much with it. Just like probably the first Apple XR or VR device will be really cool, but it will not be the one that we'll have 10 years from now. I think that 10 years from now, Apple will probably stop making their iPhones because we have an AR glass and I can just spin up 5 screens in front of me, a keyboard, and I can swipe, and I'm just in a cafe, and together with 50 other people, and we're all swiping in mid-air and doing weird things in front of our eyes, and I think if you would fast forward and you would walk into a cafe 10 years from now with today's mindset, you would be like, what the hell happened to the world? But then again, it happened also 15 years ago or 20 years ago when the mobile phones came out. People said, I'm never going to use a mobile phone on the train. That's antisocial. You're not going to do that, and people can reach me over a pager or whatsoever. And now look how the world looks like. Everyone is addicted to their phones, doom scrolling on TikTok. So
yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think we all have to accept now that when you say, "Oh, that'll never happen," we have to be realistic of just how fast the technology is moving. But let's just bring this into the legal sector, if we may, Mark. A lot of our audience are legal leaders, lawyers, folks in the legal tech space. One thing which is always described to me is that the legal profession is a people business. And I would go further and say it's a presence business, because if we think of everything from hearings in courtrooms, judges, barristers, clients, juries, through to mediations, through to client meetings in offices, networking events, training, awards evenings, working together as a team, being supervised, all of these things seem to require some element of presence. So let's pick one of those, shall we? Which let's just pick working in the office and meeting clients in the office. How could that look in the metaverse?
Well, I think that's one of the easiest things that we can move to the metaverse. You can, as I said, you can use Zoom, which can be argued as Metaverse version 0.1. We can use Meet in one of the VR platforms, which you could argue is Metaverse version 0.2. You have avatars without legs, and it's not very, very, very seamless. But now, fast forward 5-7 years. And you'll be able to be in your meeting room with 2 or 3 of your colleagues, meeting your client who are on the other side of the world, and your clients are wearing, and everyone is wearing an augmented reality headset, and the clients who are virtually attending the event are holographically projected in your boardroom, and you are holographically projected or virtually projected in their virtual environment, and both are hyper realistic, and all the non-verbal communication is copied and mimicked and captured using mocap, and really the lines begin to blur. Then are you meeting virtually or are you meeting physically? And so I think from a client perspective, meeting in the metaverse, not today but 5-7 years from now, I think is something that can easily move to the metaverse, and actually will make life a lot easier, because instead of having having to fly around to meet your clients, or to have a less optimal 2D Zoom call or Teams call, you can have the best of both worlds. Not have to need to have to travel, but still have this feeling of physical presence, and being able to see all the non-verbal communication, which is so important in our communication, as long as the technology is good enough. And I'm convinced that we'll get there, and the technology will get there, and it's just a matter of time.
Yes, and you just mentioned this optimal situation of presence, which I completely agree with. What a lot of people say when they compare the old days where we all met physically to a Zoom situation is people will say, oh, you can't beat a face-to-face meeting. You make so much more progress when you sit round a table and thrash these issues out. And people who are involved in taking products to market, taking services to market, they will say as well, it's so much easier to do that when you're in front of someone, when you can see the whites of their eyes. And it seems to me that optimal experience is what underpins the advantages of the metaverse compared to something like a Zoom.
Well, absolutely. We will get to that stage where you can see all the non-verbal communication in a way that looks like as if you are physically present. We see the first examples already. Google has, I forgot what the name is, but this device which is like a bit like a phone booth, where you can. Where it feels like you are in the same room without using glasses. I think that's not optimal, because you can only have 2 or one-on-one conversations. But 5-7 years, 10 years from now, we'll have glasses where we're able to project, and it looks like as if the people are in that room, and it looks really real. And I think. In my book, I give a fictional intro of how the world will look like in 2032, and this is also one of the ideas that come in there, that you can have that physical to digital conversation and it feels like being in the physical world, because we should not forget that our brains, they cannot make the difference between physical and digital. If the quality is good enough and the latency is low enough, and the high definition enough, our brains cannot make the difference. So if we have this hybrid, or metaverse style meeting, then once we finish the meeting, our brains will think that meeting happened with everyone physically being there, and that's how we'll remember it. That's where we're heading.
Podcast today is brought to you by Zeus Tech Solutions, who provide dev on demand for law firms. When I was managing partner of a law firm, recruiting and retaining top tech talent was one of the biggest challenges. And we're still, because we didn't have the knowledge in the business to manage and coach a technical team, it was a constant cycle of frustration, downtime, lost revenue, and proclaim lying dormant. Well, for the past 5 years, Zeus have looked after both of Spirent Group's law firms in the UK and Australia, and it's been a game changer. Now we get all of our tech on tap, from IT director to .NET developer. We get that whenever we want. Zeus provide the best use of tech to all of our fee earners with no recruitment fees and absolutely no nonsense. So if you're a law firm who are frustrated with their tech anywhere in the world, go to www.zeustechsolutions.co.uk and hit the live chat option, and the answer to all of your tech solutions, however specific they are, is right there. Better still, if you mention that you heard about Zeus on the podcast, you will get a free health check for your case management system. So that's Zeus Tech Solutions, dev on demand for law firms. And now on with the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you can translate that scenario, can't you, to all of the different environments that I went through there. Everything from a courtroom to an awards evening to a training room to potentially a university where students are studying a law degree. So it seems to me that the legal sector is absolutely ripe for this quality of technology as and when the breakthroughs are made. Perhaps we'll come back to that in a minute in terms of these breakthroughs that are needed, but will the metaverse need a system of law like the physical world does? So, I mean, clearly we read a lot about already, there's an element of ownership in the metaverse. We've heard of people buying property on the metaverse, which I imagine would involve some form of legal transaction and then obviously ownership rights. Tell me about how that's going to work. First of all, how is it possible, bearing in mind we are now, to actually buy tangible items in the metaverse, and how might a legal system operate in that next stage of the internet?
Well, I have good news. I've got bad news for all the legal listeners and the legal practitioners. You will lose a lot of work, and you will gain a lot of work. So I think all in all, you have plenty of work for the coming decades. I'm pretty convinced about that. I'll get to that in a minute. Why? First, to answer your question about why you will have less work is first of all, I think if you look at the digital real estate, virtual real estate, which I am not a big fan of, I think it's a bit of a nonsense. Why would you on earth spend millions of dollars on an artificially created scarcity in a grid-like pattern that's in the digital world where the laws of physics do not apply. So a grid-like pattern does not make sense to begin with. So the fact that you spend more money because you can be close to someone, a celebrity or so, is nonsense, because you can just teleport there. So this just doesn't make sense. But I've written at length about that I don't believe in virtual real estate. I understand it from a capital raising perspective, but from a usability or user perspective, it doesn't make sense at all from my perspective. From an ownership perspective, that's of course where non-fungible tokens come in. And non-fungible tokens are a great way for us to, for the first time, to prove the ownership of a digital asset. And I think that's a fantastic breakthrough, technological breakthrough, that will allow us to prove the ownership of something digital, which up until now has never been possible, because you can just copy it because it's digital. Thanks to NFTs, we can prove that you own a particular digital asset, be it a painting, be it a picture, be it a 3D asset, be it a book or whatever type of content. If you can prove your ownership, you can then start to monetize it. You can sell it, you can rent it out, you can borrow against it, you can do whatever with it to make money with it. I think that is a really cool example. But all of these assets, virtual real estate is also linked to NFTs. So it's also an asset that you own. But all of these are linked using smart contracts on the blockchain. And once we talk about smart contracts, of course, that's where the legal profession will lose their jobs, because these are we don't need legal professionals to when it comes to smart contracts. And to a little bit, because it might be useful to have the legal terms that you agree upon between different parties finalized, but then they will be put into a blockchain, and they will be they will be put into a smart contract, put on the blockchain, and then they will execute automatically whenever the conditions are there. So from that perspective, I think there will be for a lot of legal professions, think of notaries as well, less jobs. But then if we look at the metaverse, again, the 3D internet, the immersive internet, all the problems, all the dangers that are lurking in the corners of the metaverse will be significant. If we think that the current internet is bad, and there's a lot of work for legal professions in the current internet, think about when we go 100 times or 1,000 times the amount of data that we create in the metaverse, and all the dangers from harassment to privacy issues to security issues, to hacking, to health issues, to deepfakes issues, to copyright issues. The list is very, very long, to polarization, because basically all the problems that we have today will be extrapolated in this immersive internet. So there will be plenty of work for the legal profession to figure out and to help people who have become victim of these problems.
Yes, absolutely. I want to touch on this issue of identity next. But first of all, let's just talk about some of the concepts you raised there. So first of all, an NFT, that's a non-fungible token. So that could be, for example, I've read a lot about digital clothing, because if we have our avatars in the metaverse, we might want them to wear digital clothing. Let's just use that as a very basic example. And then you touched upon blockchain and smart contracts. So first, let me tell you how I understand what you're saying. If I was to be selling a batch of digital clothing in the metaverse to a metaverse retailer who would then sell these to metaverse consumers, rather than me do that transaction via email and some form of bank transfer, blockchain provides the platform for that transaction to take place through cryptocurrency. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So this is like what I call e-commerce or immersive commerce, and I think e-commerce will vastly surpass e-commerce. What you said is correct. If you want to, our avatars are born naked, so to say, so then we need to dress them. And don't forget that digital fashion is a multi-billion-dollar industry already, because for Generation Z and Generation Alpha, or maybe I should say Generation AI, their digital identity is as important or more important than their physical identity. That's for you and me, for the older generations. That is something that is mind-blowing. At least it should be, because it's a completely different perspective. For them, the digital world is as important or more important than the physical world. And for them, there are no lines between the physical and the digital world. In their world, the avatar needs to be dressed and it needs to have an identity. So you want to buy clothes for your avatar and wearables and all kinds of cool stuff. Now, you might also want to sell those clothes, and that's where blockchain comes into play. You might want to sell them directly to you, peer to peer. I don't need to go through a store to do that. I can also buy them directly from a digital fashion developer, such as, for example, the Fabricant from Amsterdam, which is one of the leading platforms in this space. But the cool thing is that all these fashion items are NFTs, as long as you are at least in a decentralized platform. You can also have, for example, a platform like Roblox or like Fortnite, where you can also buy digital fashion, and then they are not NFTs because these platforms are centralized, so there's no need for an NFT. The problem with that is that it's owned centrally by the company behind Roblox or behind Fortnite, in this case Epic, and they can just make changes, or they can just take your clothing as they feel suit, which I think is problematic. Now, if we want to have that's why I'm a big fan of an open metaverse where we have full control of our own data, of our own digital identity, and of our own digital assets. And in that case, now imagine that you buy NFT sneakers from Nike. Nike is doing very, very well in this space. And imagine that you use those sneakers in an online game, for example, a decentralized version of Fortnite, and you are in a famous fight there, and you win, and your sneakers get digital scratch marks on the shoes, and therefore these digital Nikes with scratch marks, which can be linked to that fight, because always on the blockchain, so everything, there's full provenance of what's happening. Those Nikes might become more valuable because you have proof that they were part of an important event in the metaverse. And since it all is all tracked and traceable and verifiable on the blockchain, we can prove it. And then you can sell those Nikes for more than you bought them. And they might have actually be damaged, they might have scratch marks, but that actually increases the value. So for some of the listeners, this might sound really far-fetched and like, really, why on earth would you want to do that? But for the next generations, these kind of things are really important. I think that's where blockchain comes into place, where NFTs come into play, where smart contracts come into play. That would make this possible. It's all peer-to-peer, so once it's set up, there's no need for legal work anymore. But that's sort of where we're going, and I think that's fascinating. I think it's if we can sell our digital assets to whomever we want through whatever platform we want, just like in the physical world. I can sell this shirt if I don't like it anymore, and I can sell it to someone else, and there's no one who can take this away from me because they don't like me. Well, unless you're a thief, of course, but the company who created this one cannot say, well, Mark, we don't want you to have that shirt anymore, we're going to take it away. In the digital world, on Roblox, on Fortnite, that is perfectly possible, and there's nothing you can do about it. And there are plenty of examples of this happening to children, to 13, 14-year-old children, where Roblox has decided to close their platform with all their assets in it, and the parents were not able to do anything about it. I don't think we should move into that future. I think we should move in a future where we have control over assets, and I can decide myself what I do with my digital shirt.
Well, you've touched there upon a number of points around identity. Now, identity from a legal profession perspective is critical because, by way of some examples, lawyers invest a lot of money in their systems around identity verification. And now that can be to prevent money laundering. It can be for the purposes of monitoring passage of client funds, cybercrime, know your client, all of these really important legal principles. So a lot of money is invested by lawyers in the physical world in terms of checking that their clients and other stakeholders in any form of legal transaction are who they say they are. And I think with the current stage of the internet, there have been some unintended consequences from the fact that I don't think big tech invested enough in having the issue of identity at the forefront of its planning. And I think everything there from trolling to cybercrime has been a consequence to some extent of that failure to nail down what identity is and how it's protected at the outset. Is this an area you think, from a metaverse perspective, has to be got right from day one? And if so, how do you think that can happen?
I completely agree with you, and I think identity has been missed in the development of the internet, and the reason why I think is simply because when the internet was developed 3-4 decades ago, the people who had access to the internet all knew each other. So there was no identity issue, because you knew everyone, and therefore you could trust everyone, because it was just your colleague 100 kilometers further away in a different university whom you knew. So there was no need for an identity protocol. I think it's really problematic that we don't have that, especially in the metaverse, and we do not want to rely on centralized companies owning and controlling our digital identity, especially not if that digital identity is more important than our physical identity. Now, can you imagine that there's a company that would own your physical identity? I think that's really, really problematic. And there are plenty of examples that have shown here that this is problematic. And I have one example in my book where you have the an Australian artist who has the handle or the username Metaverse on Instagram, and a couple of days after Mark Zuckerberg announced Meta, her entire identity on Instagram, with all her work, all her artwork, everything in it, was deleted, and she could not get it back. She tried for 3 weeks to get verified, to get it back, and only when she reached out to, I think, the New York Times reached out to Meta and said, "Oh, we're so sorry, it happened by accident." We all know that nonsense.
Yes.
We all know that it's bullshit. And I think I think that is really, really problematic. We should not want to live in a society where one person can have that much power. Now, to avoid that, we need a self-sovereign identity, and a self-sovereign identity is where we have full control over our identity, and that would also work in the physical world. So, self-sovereign identity, it works with blockchain, with zero-knowledge proofs, where you can prove a certain fact without revealing that fact. If you want to go to a bar and you have to prove that you're over 18 years older, you do not have to give your date of birth. You just have to give a proof that you're older than yes or no than 18, and just that proof is sufficient. And then you don't have to give away any data. That is really, really important in the metaverse for multiple reasons. And I'll give you one reason in particular, because in the metaverse it becomes a lot more easy to be someone else. Especially with all the hype around generative AI, I can clone my voice now, my own voice, in 3 seconds. I'm building a digital twin of myself, which eventually should look like me, move like me, sound like me, talk like me, and basically be me in the digital world. I'm trying to do that. It's very difficult at the moment still, but technology is improving. So in due course, that will become a lot easier, and it will be very, very realistic. Now, if I can do that, you can do it too, Simon. You can, my images are online, my videos are online, my voice is online. So you've got all the data, all the assets to be me in the metaverse. And if you look like me and you talk like me and you move like me, people will think that you are me, because we are gullible, we're lazy, easily convinced. And then you can be me in the metaverse. Now, if that happened to me, this gets confusing really quickly. If this happens to me, that would be annoying, but not a world problem. But if it happens to a CEO of a public company or a president or prime minister of a country, this is a lot more problematic. We already saw it happening a couple of months ago when Twitter released their blue tick for $8, and within I think half an hour, people started impersonating brands, and brands lost billions of dollars on the public market because of statements that were given by these fake profiles. That's problematic. So we need a solution for that.
we really do, and it's fascinating, of course, that you mentioned Twitter's blue tick, because I mean that was viewed as a solution, wasn't it? That relatively modest monthly payment was seen as something that could verify identity. But as you said, the scams move quicker than the solutions. Yeah,
well, I think that was very short-sighted and actually really stupid, that think that, well, I'll just ask people to pay $8 and therefore we solve the issue of verification. That's nonsense, If you have unlimited funds, and state actors and hackers generally do have unlimited funds, you need to have a solution that can cater for stopping actors with unlimited funds, and just having to pay your credit card to pay $8 obviously is not a solution.
No, it's not.
So the question, of course, is what is a good solution? Now, I think the verification in the metaverse is really, really important. Verification that you can verify that something is AI. That's one thing. That this voice has been cloned with is a cloned voice, is a cloned AI voice, or that this text has been written by ChatGPT, or this avatar is a copy or automatically created. That's one thing. But then also, if you have an avatar that's me in the metaverse, and it looks like me and talks like me and moves like me, how do you verify that you're dealing with the real me? Well, you can use NFTs for that. There's a soul-bound token. It's a token that you cannot trade. But wallets get hacked all the time, so that soul-bound token can probably also be hacked. So that's not a good solution. Then we can use biometrics, which is definitely an option. We can use biometric facial, but that can be hacked as well. We can use your heart rhythm, which is unique, or your movement, which is also unique. So we can use those kind of biometrical data. But then we should not want to have that biometric data being stored centralized, because then it can be hacked. So we go into this vicious circle. How do we verify that the person that I'm talking with in this virtual world that looks hyper realistic is indeed the person that he or she says he or she is? That's that's a really big problem, and very few people are thinking about it.
And I mean that is a worry, isn't it? The fact that it's perhaps not being thought of. Am I getting it right that the foolproof technology to conclusively prove in the metaverse that someone is who they say they are. That technology's not there yet, but are you hopeful that in the fullness of time there are good actors out there who will be seeking to bring that to bear in a way which isn't centralized?
Well, I hope so. That's one of the work in my institute to focus on educating people to do the right thing. Because in the end we live in a capitalist society, and if you can make money by doing stuff, make more money by doing stuff centralized, people are easily convinced to do that. Decentralized by definition means more work, more difficult, more expensive. And some of the solutions that I just mentioned, hypothetical solutions that you link your heart rhythm to your soulbound token that links to your avatar, are not foolproof, 100% foolproof. So we should be aware of that we will, we are going to move into a zero trust society where you cannot trust anyone anymore. That's really problematic. If I would meet you face to face, Simon, I can be pretty sure that you are Simon, Yeah. Unless you're wearing kind of mask over your head, and that's from the movies. But I can be pretty sure that you are indeed Simon. In the virtual world, you do not have that guarantee. As people in today's world, people are hiding behind their social media profiles, and through that they are saying whatever they want to say, causing all kinds of problems and polarization. Now, move that to a 3D immersive world, where you can just look like anyone and say anything you want, and nobody knows who is the person behind it.
Yeah, I mean it's clear, isn't it? And I mean, it seems to me that from the perspective of the legal sector, the journey for the metaverse really must include this considerable problem being solved, because even the most cutting edge of identity verification products, software products that are out there now, they involve passports being scanned, access being given to various government databases so that national insurance numbers can be checked and that sort of thing. It seems to me that if there was a way of verifying identity through, you said this phrase earlier, that you just know, you know what you need to know. So if we meet each other, you're not going to know my passport number, but you're going to know it's me. That's what we want, isn't it? We want to move to a situation where we have that digital assurance that people are who they say they are.
But that's really difficult. I'll give you an example in today's world. In Australia, the Australian Tax Office, they have a system that in Australia, your voice identifies you. And so you can be identified, you can opt in to be identified by your voice. And then they don't have to ask any identification questions. You can just flow through it and get your taxes done or change your life or whatsoever. I can clone my voice in 3 seconds. So that system, by definition now, is stupid.
It's bankrupt, isn't it?
And should be removed. It's bankrupt. Yeah, it's completely bankrupt. And I think that the Australian Tax Office has no clue about that. So that's, it's
So it's a tough problem, and it's perhaps the one which we need to think about in terms of the timescales for this emerging tech. Mark, we're coming to our end of our time together, and I'm so grateful for you helping us with this today. Let's maybe end with some top tips for law firms who are thinking about metaverse business strategies. Now, it seems to me that in the legal profession, and not just the legal profession, but particularly in the law, whenever any new type of technology comes out, within 5 seconds of it being a thing, you do tend to have law firms rushing to the media saying that they're already ahead of the curveball. So, for example, as soon as ChatGPT became a thing, practically the next day, you had law firms announcing that they now had pieces of ChatGPT software which are fundamental to their practice. when I've talked to people in those law firms, the majority of people don't know what it is they're talking about. And it seems to me to be a public relations exercise sometimes. If you were advising law firms or other businesses, as I know you do throughout the world, how should we be approaching our metaverse strategy?
Well, I think you first and foremost need to educate yourself. You need to understand what this means. If you state that you have integrated ChatGPT in your platform, I think you're pretty stupid, because ChatGPT is a tool and not even a very good tool. It's an advanced tool, but it makes tons of mistakes, and I can know because I wrote a book with it in 5 days, and it came up with a lot of nonsense. If you rely on that technology, I think it's not a practice where I would put my business. Let's put it that way. I think especially in the law practice and the legal industry, I think it's very, very important that we keep thinking. And we're not giving everything away to AI. A phrase that I always say is AI beats humans, but humans working with AI will beat AI. I think that collaboration, that's where the solution lies. So you have to not give your entire practice to AI or just fully move to the metaverse, but you have to use these tools, because that's what they are. They're tools. They are means to an end. They're not the end, I think that is really important. But you need to understand these tools, You're not going to give a chainsaw to a 13-year-old kid, and said, "Can you chop those trees down?" This is the equivalent of that, because these are very advanced tools, and you need to be able to understand how they work. And you can only understand how they work, because it doesn't come with a manual, by experimenting with it, and by exploring what these technologies mean for you, for your business, for your legal practice, for your law firm. And only if you truly understand these technologies, then I think you can start to incorporate them. Then you can start to use them as what they are, tools.
That's a great explanation. It's a medium to long term strategy. I mean, just to end on a note of real optimism, where I am on all of this, it seems to me that the principles which underpin the metaverse are extremely positive. It's about bringing that visceral experience of presence to the business environment, to the legal environment, to society. But I think that anyone who is looking at this from a business perspective, perhaps first of all needs to view this as a 3 to 5 year journey at the least, perhaps longer than that. But also perhaps we don't enter this with an insatiable desire to make money. I mean, there's no doubt that there are business models here that can be very lucrative. But perhaps we need to think about this next stage of the immersive internet as an opportunity to create something that is valuable for the business world and to society generally, rather than just a short-term money-making tool.
Well, that's how I think you should look at this technology. We should. The way I try to understand technology is how are they beneficial to society? How can we, as a society, benefit from this technology, and not a tiny elite of people who are building fancy technology and selling it for a lot of money. I think we really have to take a step back. We've sort of been sleepwalking into this digital age, and we've never really thought about what have we created. And I think it's time to start thinking about that before it is too late.
100%. Well, it's a very optimistic note to end it upon. We've got a chance to get this stage of the internet right, learn from our mistakes, and I can think of tons of ways the legal sector can benefit from it. So, Mark, thank you so much for your company and for your expertise today. We have got your links to your books and your website at the bottom in the podcast description. I cannot recommend your work highly enough. Thank you so much for your time. All the very best. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again in the future.
Perfect. Thanks for having me here, Simon. It's been a great pleasure.
And to everyone watching and listening, thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this podcast useful. We'll see you back on From the Courtroom to the Boardroom every other Wednesday. Thank you all.